1-800-298-5618.
This is Washington Watch with Tony Perkins, your daily voice in Washington, D.C. on issues of faith, family, and freedom. And now, here's your host, Family Research Council President, Tony Perkins.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Washington Watch. More and more information is coming to light about the various government scandals and cover-ups here in Washington, D.C., but scandal and wrongdoing are not limited to Washington. By now, most Americans are familiar with the gruesome details of Dr. Kermit Gosnell's abortion clinic in Philadelphia. Called by prosecutors a house of horrors, Gosnell regularly killed babies born alive from botched abortions and then even cut some of their feet off and kept them in little jars as if they were trophies. The question we must address is this: is the Gosnell case an aberration, or does it represent something much wider spread and even typical of the abortion industry in our country today? In this special edition of Washington Watch, we're going to be talking about scandalous and illegal conduct that is happening right now across America in abortion clinics. Behind the nice-sounding clinic names and the so-called choices that these clinics offer, what really happens to women and their unborn children when abortion providers do their work? Today, I'll be joined on this special program by Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona, and Live Action's founder and president, Lila Rose, whose pioneering work in undercover videos of abortion providers has exposed this industry for what it is: an industry driven by profit, void of compassion, that preys upon not only the unborn, but their mothers as well. First, though, let's set the stage for today's program by considering a hard truth. Kermit Gosnell represents a far wider trend in the abortion industry than the abortionists and their political allies would like us to believe. Consider just a few examples. At the clinic of a physician named Douglas Carpin in Houston, post-birth abortions happen 3 or more times a day. According to one of his former aides. She described his techniques this way, quote, "When he did an abortion, especially an over 20-week abortion, most of the time the fetus would come completely out before he cut the spinal cord or he introduced one of the instruments into the soft spot of the fetus in order to kill the baby," end quote. Isolated occurrences? I think not. In his testimony in the recent Gosnell trial, Stephen Massoff said he personally saw over 100 babies born alive who had their necks snipped in what he said was literally a beheading. Well, I hope you're outraged by that. But the question is, what can we do? Well, we can call for full enforcement of the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, which requires doctors to do all they can to save infants who survive attempted abortions. We can call for criminal prosecution of those abortionists who routinely let newborns die or actively kill them. And we can call on Congress to investigate why our Justice Department has done so little to enforce a law that, if enacted, or if acted upon, would have already saved thousands of little lives. And we can also, based upon the advancements of science that inform us that children after the point of 20 weeks gestation not only feel pain, but feel it more acutely, can call for an end to abortions after the point of pain. With that framework, let me welcome the president of Live Action, Lila Rose. Lila, thanks for being with us, and again, thank you for the incredible work that you have done in bringing to light what is happening across this nation in these abortion clinics.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Well, Lila, let me begin with this question, because many would like us to believe that what took place in Philadelphia in Gosnell's clinic was isolated. Your work, this latest round of undercover videos, show that that is not true at all.
All of these investigations that we've released through our Inhuman campaign demonstrate that Gosnell is not alone. Even though that he's been called or dismissed by pro-abortion advocates as an outlier, you know, the one alone and not with many, he is just the tip of the iceberg. And our investigation, done over a period of 6 months using actors who were literally 23 to 26 weeks pregnant, many of them first-time moms, very brave women, went undercover across the country into the late-term abortion industry to document that the born alive abortions, killing children, infanticide, killing children who survive abortions is commonplace, showing how the brutality of the abortion procedure, how these are done, most Americans don't realize it, and showing the danger to women, how this is the antithesis of empowering women, but this is hurting women physically, emotionally, and in every way.
Well, Lila, what I found so interesting in watching some of these video clips is that these abortion providers, administrators, didn't even seem to hesitate to describe the late-term abortion procedure, plus the fact that they would kill babies born alive.
Exactly, Tony, when they're talking to a potential client in an abortion clinic who's in a situation usually of desperation or feeling scared, women walk into an abortion clinic not feeling powerful, but feeling powerlessness. They walk in there feeling the pressures of a boyfriend or a job that they feel like isn't compatible with their baby, or they feel a lack of support. And so when they're in this extremely vulnerable position, talking with this abortionist who's sharing with them, basically, or the nurse who's sharing with them, this is what's going to happen to you, pay us up to $10,000, you get a peek into what these women really experience and a peek into the actual abortion procedure, what these women are going through and what these children, the torturous, really barbaric procedures that these children are going through.
It amazes me that there's not even an attempt to hide this, which tells me, as a former law enforcement official, that the laws that are currently on the books are not being enforced, or else they would be hiding this.
It's a great point. The Born Alive Infants Protection Act, which you mentioned, it's at the federal level, and it was signed off on it was bipartisan, everyone agreed to it. It doesn't have the teeth that are necessary. And General Holder was even asked recently by Congressman Franks, and he'll be with us, I know, shortly, but he asked, have you ever once enforced the Born Alive Infants Protection Act? And General Holder hardly knew what it was, he couldn't really answer, and that's because no, Gosnell and the chance raid that was done on his clinic in Philadelphia had to do with drug prescriptions. It wasn't even about the other horrors being committed. Carpin emerging in Texas, Santangelo in Washington, D.C., Arizona, New York. The accounts are growing, the stories are emerging, because this is a nationwide crisis, really, of what's happening behind closed doors to our children and to women.
You're listening to Washington Watch, a special edition. By the way, we're going to be talking about a number of video clips. You can also hear them. We're going to be describing one that took place in New York City here, one of the undercover operations that Lila and her team went on. But you can go to the website, TonyPerkins.com, follow the links to live action, and you can see all of this video that's up there. It's astounding. As I said, there seems to be no shame whatsoever of what they're doing. Before we have to go to the break, let's listen to this first clip from New York. Can you set this up for our listeners?
This is Dr. Emily's health center, even though it's nothing to do with health, in the Bronx of New York City. And our investigator is going in. The baby's old enough to survive outside the womb, 23 weeks pregnant. And in this clip, you're going to hear the admission by the nurse or by the clinic worker about how they would kill her child if that baby survived the failed abortion attempt. Because keep in mind, with every late-term abortion, they must induce labor for these women. So sometimes the baby will come out before the abortionist has had a chance to kill it, whether by tearing an arm off or injecting poison into the little heart. Sometimes the baby comes out alive. So you'll hear the description of what they might do if the child, that little infant, survives the abortion attempt.
All right, let's watch and listen to this.
Get rid of, that's just how you get rid of it, whatever. Garbage. Yeah. What if it was twitching or something like that?
The solution will make it stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not going to be moving around in the jar.
Okay, the solution would make it
Yeah, that's the whole purpose of the solution.
Okay. So if it looked like it was like breathing or something like that,
It'll automatically stop. It won't be able to.
It won't be okay. So I'm not even going to see it.
No.
I know it's kind of hard to hear, obviously, undercover video. What they were talking about there is you talked about inducing labor. A child is often born alive, and they were talking about putting in a solution which then will kill the child.
Exactly. The clinician is describing to our investigator, again, a 23-week-old baby, old enough to survive outside the womb, how if that baby does survive the abortion because it comes out, they're inducing labor, they would put that child struggling for its life, that infant, in a jar of toxic solution, perhaps formaldehyde. And then she kind of looks at our investigator and says, well, then it can't, that's the whole point of the solution, she says. It will basically stop moving because it's drowning to death in this jar of poison. I mean, horrific abuse of a child who survives an abortion, and that's murder. This is a child that is outside of the womb now. Even our laws, as poor as they are, do protect that child, and yet they talk about killing it.
But again, Lila, what we're finding and what your undercover videos confirmed, what we saw in Houston, Texas, just last week, uncovered what we've heard out of the trial of Kermit Gosnell, is that this is a common occurrence, that children are born alive from these failed abortions, and then their lives are taken outside of the womb. That's infanticide. That's murder.
Exactly. And it's hard to hear this because I think when people are confronted with the idea of an infant fighting for its life, they become uncomfortable and they think, well, of course we should protect it. But keep in mind, for every child that's killed outside of the womb, there are dozens killed inside the womb or more. And that's what's legal. So we need to really look at our laws and say, why aren't our laws protecting children inside the womb when we claim to protect them outside the womb, but that same child can be killed brutally, legally inside the womb?
You're listening to Washington Watch, a special edition of Washington Watch. I'm joined right now by Lila Rose. We'll be joined momentarily by Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, later by Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona. We're talking about the work that Live Action has done, uncovering in the industry, the late-term abortion industry, how often the lives of children are terminated outside the womb, which is clearly in violation of current law. Not only many state laws, but clearly in violation of federal law. Now, Lila, one of the things we've been told that the whole thing about Gosnell was the fact it was an aberration. It was unsanitary conditions. It was isolated. Is that what you're finding out when it comes to the profit-driven industry of abortion? They really don't care about the conditions that these women go into.
It's exactly right. And it's been claimed, of course, Gosnell is isolated, but it's clear. We're looking from Houston. Douglas Carpin twisting off the necks of born-alive infants. We're looking at Santangelo in Washington, D.C., letting babies surviving his abortion attempts, just leaving them to die. In New York City, drowning them in jars of toxic solution. And this is just because of the reports of pro-lifers. And in Gosnell's case, a chance FBI raid. But there's a whole slew of clinics out there, of abortion centers, of abortionists who are committing these atrocities every day, and people just don't know. This is a nationwide scandal that is growing, that needs to be reported on, people need to be aware of, so we can put a stop to it because lives are at risk.
Is the abortion industry buying protection from their contributions to the political establishment?
It's a great question, Tony. I mean, you look at Planned Parenthood, Federation of America, and their powerful lobbying center on Capitol Hill. They're getting over...
Who spoke at their recent fundraising event? Wasn't that President Obama?
Yeah, it's an atrocity in and of itself that the president of our country is honoring the first sitting president to address the leading abortion chain in our nation, who is ultimately covering for people like Gosnell and Carpin through their advocacy, through their fight against every abortion regulation in the book. And he's going there to say to Planned Parenthood that God bless them. God bless them and their fight against every protection for the child in the womb and for the woman walking into these clinics. Wow. That's a sort of support, the political entrenchment in the abortion industry that we have in our country right now.
You're listening to a special edition of Washington Watch. When we come back, there are some in Congress that's calling the Gosnell verdict a wake-up call. Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn will join Lila and I as we continue this discussion. For more, if you want to see these video clips yourself, go to the website tonyperkins.com and follow the links to Live Action. Don't go away. We're going to be back with more Washington Watch right after these messages.
I remember when Tony Perkins first felt the heart of God to call pastors to have a corporate time of prayer for the nation every year. The call to fall was born out of a leader's heart for the nation and the understanding that pastors and their churches can be positive gatekeepers for America.
I believe that prayer is essential and fundamental for our success in being involved in whatever happens in government and politics. And the reason why is because prayer, if you look at the believers in the New Testament, prayer is to enable them to receive power and anointing so they could be effective. We cannot be effective without God. We need the Lord to empower us, to give us boldness, to give us confidence, to break the fear out of our lives so we could go forth and be the world changers.
I believe prayer's our only hope. I believe that praying for God to forgive us and to give us another chance as a nation is the place where we are right now. And if we don't get that, we don't have any place to go.
And the last several years, we have partnered with the Family Research Council and taken part in the Call to Fall. In fact, last year, after the Call to Fall event, I had people come up to me saying, "Can we do this every Sunday?" They were so excited about being able to come and pray for America. So we actually have our worship team that's there. They will play. Someone will grab the microphone and pray. They'll break out into a song. Somebody else will pray. They'll lead us in another chorus of worship. So it's this atmosphere not only of prayer and intercession, but of worship to God. And then it just sets the stage for Sunday's worship time.
The Sunday before Independence Day, we're asking that you spend at least a few minutes on your knees as a church praying for America. Visit calltofall.org to join what is becoming a movement with churches participating in all 50 states. Who knows but what God might hear our cries, forgive our sins, and heal our land.
In response to this case, a lot of states have enacted regulations, and we've seen a lot of clinic closures due to unsanitary conditions. So it's indicative of a widespread problem. We'd also like to see a pain-capable ban on late-term abortions because we know that children at 20 weeks gestation can feel pain, and these procedures are often very gruesome. And so we're pressing Congress to enact pain-capable bans.
AFR.net.
Welcome back to this special edition of Washington Watch. So glad you're with us on this Tuesday afternoon. You know, there is a lot that can be accomplished to protect the unborn through volunteer work and activism. I strongly encourage that. But action from our allies in Congress is absolutely critical and could not be more timely. And in the wake of last week's Gosnell's verdict, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee's 7th Congressional District said this. She said, quote, "Gosnell's conviction is not only an indictment of the abortion industry at large, but it's also a wake-up call for Congress to reevaluate the inhuman conditions and the late-term abortion attitudes and practices which have recently come to light in many states. No one, not the President, Planned Parenthood, nor the mainstream media can say Congress shouldn't move forward with prompt legislation to protect women and children from further Gosnell-like violence and destruction," end quote. All I can say to that is well said. And we're grateful to have people like Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn in Congress, and I'm happy to welcome her now to the program. Congresswoman, welcome back.
Thank you, and it is so good to be with you, and especially on a special day.
It is bringing attention to an issue that has long been neglected thanks to the work of Lila and her team and others. Right. And you have been on point on this issue in terms of trying to take taxpayers out of the business of supporting the nation's largest abortion provider.
Absolutely, and as you well remember, about 2.5 years ago, we at the Energy and Commerce Committee started an investigation into Planned Parenthood. And of course, Lila had some videos that we referenced in that. And there was a reason that we did that. And we felt like that since taxpayer dollars, and I think it's important to always make the distinction, not federal funds, taxpayer dollars, were going into the abortion business, if you will, via Planned Parenthood, that it was important for us to look at that use. Now, last year, they got over $500 million. So this is something we've been building a body of evidence, if you will, into the federal record as to how they were using that money. And of course, I have H.R. 61, which would prohibit those taxpayer dollars from going into abortion, basically defunding Planned Parenthood, if you will, from those practices. We felt like that was important, and especially important after we learned that Planned Parenthood had given a directive to their local affiliates to do abortions, to carry out abortions. And then more people began to pay attention to the legislation and the work that we've been doing now for this period of time at Energy and Commerce Committee once Gosnell came to light. And then Planned Parenthood, who knew about this, started to say, well, this is an outlier, and then what do you know? There is a body of evidence building that it is not an outlier.
Congresswoman, what has the response been like in the House to your bill to defund Planned Parenthood? What are the challenges that you're facing right now?
Well, one of the things that you always face is there are those who want to keep federal funding. And President Reagan said it well. There's no such thing as eternal life on earth except with a federal government program. And, it's just so hard to pull that away. But what we have seen is an awareness from people via what has happened with Gosnell, with the 15 states over the last 3 years that have started to conduct investigations, the 80 violations that were recently found in Virginia, the Carpin situation in Texas. People are saying, wait a minute, money is tight at the federal level. This is not the best use of it. So I think that it is an opportunity for us to move forward and to pass H.R. 61.
Now you kind of, you called the media out
for
their inattention
they
to...
need a lot of that.
Plus 71 of my colleagues joined me. So
and eventually they came around, but still not to the degree that they would on many other issues. Still, the vast majority of Americans did not know about Kermit Gosnell, even though there was a 6-week trial that took place there. Why do you think it is?
We've asked them, and of course 71 of my colleagues did join me in writing the letter to ask why the major media outlets were avoiding this topic. And we're waiting for their response. I have to guess or to make the presumption that either they're avoiding that trial and did not cover it because it affected poor women in minority neighborhoods, or either their predisposition was to protect abortion and the abortion industry. And it's got to be one or the other, because their absence and their silence on the issue is noted in the lack of attention that was given. When you're giving more attention to a trial, the Jodi Arias trial, when you're covering snow cone kings in New Jersey, you have to wonder why there was a decision not to cover the Gosnell trial and the verdict. You're talking about over 250 counts. You're talking about multiple murder convictions, infanticide, racketeering. This was a really big, substantial case.
With Planned Parenthood receiving over $500 million of taxpayers' money, and taxpayers, not federal funds, this is our money, this is the people's money. But what is I know they've tried to stay out of this whole discussion about Gosnell because it just makes them and abortion look terrible, as it should. What is the history there? I know that Planned Parenthood has been involved in lobbying against the Born Alive Infants Protection Act. Share some of that.
One of the things that, and I think everyone by now is aware of the Planned Parenthood lobbyist in Florida who came out with the statement of they wouldn't protect a baby that had survived abortion and the concern that was caused there. So you know that that process is in place and what their inclination is. I think what has begun to happen is going past that beginning, having the states look at how they're overseeing and regulating and what is transpiring in these clinics. And so at the Energy and Commerce Committee, following on with the investigation that we've been doing, we've sent a letter to the states and asking them, what's your process for reviewing these clinics? How are you holding the State Department of Health? What are you doing to hold these clinics responsible? We have a June 1 deadline. We are waiting for the responses from the states. We anticipate we will get them. And then what you can expect to see is this summer we will process that information. I think in the fall we'll move forward and do some oversight hearings and continue the work that we've been doing on this issue.
That's so important. A lot of things will be turned up in that investigative process.
We think that it will too, but we think it's the appropriate question because it does involve taxpayer funds. And this money is being transferred to these entities, and the states have the oversight. You know, there's so much of a federal-state share in so many different areas, whether it is Medicaid processes or whether it is healthcare processes, and you see it in not only the HHS component of issues, but so many others, education. And we're just looking for the accountabilities to the taxpayer in this.
You're listening to a special edition of Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins, joined by Lila Rose and Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Joining us momentarily will be Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona. We're talking about what's been happening in these abortion clinics, in particular what's happening in the late-term abortion industry, as Lila and her team have gone around the country with a series of undercover videos. Congresswoman, I do want to commend you on that letter. Your chairman, yes. Congressman Fred Upton of Michigan. Yes. Right. I authored a Clinic Regulation Act back when I was in the legislature in Louisiana, and I know that many times those go untended, just as we saw in Philadelphia. Right. Philadelphia had oversight, but it wasn't acted upon. So I think this is a good prod to the states that this is in many ways a state issue. There's a federal connection, but our first line of defense for the unborn should be at the state level.
Absolutely, it should be. And there again, we're looking at the trend. And fortunately, what we have been able to uncover has given us a body of information to work from. 15 states. When you've got 15 states, and then when you see that there is Gosnell, then you see that there is Carpin, then you see Virginia come forward and say, well, we've had 80 violations, then it just behooves us doing our due diligence and being a good steward of taxpayer funds to turn to the states and say, give us the information that would help us to be accountable for the dollars that are being spent.
I want to play one of the videos. This is from the District of Columbia. It's a short clip. We'll listen to this and watch this and to get your reaction. You want to set this up for us, Lila?
Sure. So in this video, we're seeing Washington, D.C., where there's no limit on abortion. It goes through all 9 months, and the abortionist is Cesare Santangelo at his Surgery Center. This is blocks from the White House, and he's telling our 23-week pregnant investigator, who again, the child is old enough to survive outside the womb, what he would do to that baby if it did survive the late-term abortion, because again, inducing labor for these children, sometimes they come out alive. And Santangelo, the abortionist, describes he tries to cut the umbilical cord and wait for the baby to asphyxiate, to basically suffocate to death in the womb, but sometimes he may miss that umbilical cord. So then what happens when that baby comes out alive?
Let's watch this and let's listen to this.
Things you do. Obviously, you're here for a certain procedure, and if your pregnancy were, let's say you went into labor, the membranes ruptured, and you delivered before we got to the termination part of the procedure here, then we would do things, we would not help it. Okay. Let's say we wouldn't intubate.
Okay.
Okay.
So you would make sure.
Yeah, we wouldn't do any extra. It's like it would be a person that would be a terminal person in the hospital. Let's say that had cancer. You wouldn't do any extra procedures to help that person survive. Okay. They had do not resuscitate order.
Again, I know that some of that audio, it's undercover audio, may be difficult to hear, but I encourage you to go to the website, tonyperkins.com. Follow the links to live action. You can see all of those videos of yourself, and they're transcribed, so you can see exactly what's being said. But in this case, he's saying, as you described, a abortion that wasn't successful. The child is born, and he says, well, we'll treat it like a terminal patient in the hospital. We won't do anything to help it. Congresswoman, that's in violation of federal law.
Yes, and you know, any of us who have had little babies that are a part of our family and they have been in the NICU unit and you have watched those little ones grow and become so strong, it's just heartbreaking to hear that.
It is amazing how, I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but as I've been to the hospital 5 times with our 5 children, and you go through the nursery and then you go into the critical care unit for the babies, and how we, for one child, just because a parent says, I want to keep this child, we put all of our resources into it, but another child, simply because a parent says, I don't want it, we allow some of the most inhumane treatment.
And you know, those little NICU babies are fighters. They really are ones who are fighters because they are fighting from day one.
What's heartbreaking on this tape, besides what we just heard, is if you watch the full tape, you hear Santangelo, the abortionist, basically chastising a former patient to our investigator, saying she went to the Virginian hospital, a hospital in Virginia, when she went into labor instead of coming to me, where he would have basically let this born-alive child die in his clinic. And he says the hospital helped intubate, maybe put the baby in NICU to help protect that child, as is the law. And he was calling it the stupidest thing that they could have done. That was the heartlessness at which he's treating this child, the potential child born alive in his clinic, saying it would be stupid for the hospital. It was stupid for the hospital in the past to allow this child to have a chance at life. So it's just heartbreaking all around.
Do you see, Congresswoman, any change among your colleagues as a result of now pulling back the curtain on this late-term abortion industry?
I do. I think that the awareness of where money is going and how money is being used, and thinking it through. And I'll tell you one of the things that has changed so many, not members per se, but friends of mine who now have children that are having children. And once you get that first sonogram and you see that picture of that baby, then you've got a name, you're planning, there is that relationship that begins to be built. And it's amazing to see the change in the way individuals think about abortion and the practice of abortion.
And I would imagine that your constituents are so pleased, because when this issue gets out to more and more people, it's, on either side of the aisle, there's a conviction that this should not be allowed.
Oh, absolutely. It should not be allowed. The practice shouldn't be allowed. When you look at infanticide and you look at murder, of course, there are prosecutions for such activity. And people want to make certain that those are carried out to the full extent of the law and that justice is done. And it's one of the reasons that we are moving forward and saying, media, why did you choose not to cover it? And then turning around to the states and saying, help us with this. We want to make certain that there are accountabilities in place and protections in place for taxpayer funding, and we want to make certain that women and children are protected and have the full protection of the law. And when you look at what is transpiring in some of these clinics, you realize, no, they do not.
Absolutely. Well, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, thanks so much for being with us, and thanks
for your leadership. It's good to be with you. Listen, and I hope that, I know you have a link on your site to our legislation and our work, and my website is blackburn.house.gov. And then at Facebook, it's Marsha Blackburn. Twitter is at Marsha Blackburn, and we tweet and Facebook the links to all of these hearings if your listeners and today your viewers want to stay in touch as we move forward with our hearings.
Absolutely. We'll encourage them to do so. And if you didn't get that, just go to TonyPerkins.com, and all of that information is right there on the website, so you can track one of our heroes on Capitol Hill. All right, coming up after the break, more of the special edition when Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona joins us. Don't go away. We'll be back with more of this special edition of Washington Watch right after these messages.
Should Christians get involved in politics or focus on evangelism?
One of the unique things about our family, unique, is that a good word?
That's a great word.
Is that we have 10 children. The Lord has blessed us with a quiver full
My name is Jonathan.
Anna.
Sam. Josh. Sarah.
Daniel.
James.
Caleb. Deborah.
I'm Ben.
And so far, 5 of the 7 boys are in Boy Scouts. That's how much and how highly we think of the organization. The proposal that the National Board just announced this past week to vote on whether to open it up to openly homosexual youth, but not adult Scouters. It seems a little schizophrenic. It's messing up the very sense of what their oath to be physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight means. On the physically strong, that one's easy. You've got to walk so many miles to achieve the hiking merit badge. Mentally awake, you've got to know the right steps to do first aid to take care of a sprained ankle. All those are common, normal standards. And suddenly we want to say morally straight. Well, maybe there's not a standard after all. Maybe you can just come up with whatever's right for you. As a member of the military, I take very seriously my oath to defend the Constitution of the United States. Well, I think Boy Scouts should take very seriously the oath to be physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight.
We joined Boy Scouts because we like the leadership model, we like what they teach, we like how they're influencing our boys. And I think if you introduce this whole homosexual idea, it becomes the focus. It becomes the fear. It becomes the awkward situation. And it takes away from what the boys are there for.
Any boy is already welcome at Scouts. But when you've suddenly identified your sexuality as a key component of your identity, what you've said is, this is the most important thing of who I am. This is who I want you to know me as. Why in the world would we emphasize that? Boy Scouts is a private organization. Supreme Court said we could do what we wanted to do, so I'm hard-pressed to understand why the National Board feels it's important to make this kind of change. When we begin to say, oh, well, you know, it would only be fair. It's not fair because we have one openly homosexual. Well, where do we tent him? Who has to sleep in his tent? And how do we handle his needs? Suddenly it's becoming unfair to all the other boys to have to change.
As a parent, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to put my boys in that situation to have to deal with those decisions.
(2092).
Welcome back to this special edition of Washington Watch, your source for what's really happening here in the nation's capital. Thanks so much for being with us on this Tuesday afternoon. And I want to encourage you again, go to the website, tonyperkins.com, and follow the links to all of our guests today. Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn has her information on her website just so you can track what she's doing as it pertains to Planned Parenthood. And of course, Lila Rose, my co-host for today. You can track what Live Action is doing, and you can watch all of the videos from their latest undercover operation in the late-term abortion industry. Shocking, but it totally refutes this notion that what happened in Philadelphia was isolated. Well, Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona's 8th Congressional District is another one of the leading advocates for the unborn here in Washington, D.C. The congressman recently reintroduced the D.C. Pain-Capable Unborn Protection Act, which would outlaw abortions in the District of Columbia after 20 weeks, which is the point in which pregnancies that which is the point in a pregnancy that studies have indicated babies have developed the ability to feel pain. In fact, has shown that they feel pain more acutely than even full-term born babies. Well, last week, Congressman Trent Franks announced that he is amending the bill to apply nationwide in a bid to prevent more cases like that of Kermit Gosnell. As chair of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice, he will hold a hearing on the legislation this Thursday. And he joins us now to discuss this important piece of legislation. Congressman, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Well, thank you for having me on. You already know how I feel about FRC and all the good work that you do. I think you guys are sort of the gold standard of everything so many of us would like to see come about in America.
Well, thank you, Trent. I appreciate that. And I know Lila is grateful for your leadership.
We're grateful for hers. I mean, she's the one that makes these things possible for the rest of us to do.
Well, let's talk about that, because this latest round of not only undercover videos, but combined with revelations that came forth in the Gosnell trial, is this a moment in time in which America can maybe get back on the right track as it pertains to human life?
Well, Tony, I hope so. You know, throughout history, when there have been victims that people didn't recognize, and I don't have to name the litany, they're pretty significant, it seemed like two things were important to change people's minds. We had to somehow demonstrate the humanity, or show the humanity of the victim and the inhumanity of what is being done to them. And when that happened, hearts and minds began to change. And I think that America is ripe for that change. I believe that. And I believe that if they get a true glimpse into abortion on demand in America, that they will not support it. It will not be sustained in the hearts and minds of Americans. And so you know, when I look at this Kermit Gosnell situation, I mean, it is kind of a mysterium tremendum, I think, in Latin's term. It's almost so horrible as to be unknowable. But he demonstrated the reality of abortion on demand in this country, and probably one of the greatest takeaways, I hope, is really just a little bit of a takeoff from what you just said, and that is that this is not a big unique thing. If Kermit Gosnell had aborted the children that he was convicted of murder for killing, if he had aborted them a few minutes later at each time when they hadn't passed through the birth canal yet, in many states what he did would be perfectly legal. That's why this bill started out, one of the reasons it started out to be a D.C. pain-capable bill, because in Washington, D.C., in the seat of freedom, the capital of the country that we call the home of the free, I mean the land of the free and the home of the brave, there was no protection for unborn children at any age. You can abort in labor in the nation's capital. And we wanted to show that, because somehow we have to punch through the denial in America. And we thought that might be significant. But when Kermit Gosnell did what he did, we thought, okay, maybe now America is finally awake. And maybe now is the time when we can say we're going to try to bring some semblance of some protection, at least when they can feel this horrible pain. At least we can, you know, spare them that. Can we not do that much? And are we not still enough America to do that much?
Congressman, with a bill to ban abortion nationally at 20 weeks, I mean, this hasn't, to my knowledge, this hasn't been done before. And with the stories about Gosnell and Carpen and Santangelo and Carhart emerging, these horrific tales of what happens to the child inside and outside the womb, what do you think the response is going to be like to this bill? What kind of response do you think that it will have?
Well, it's important to know that the pro-abortion industry or the abortion industry will be shrill like they've never been before, because they know that their secret is out. And they understand that they're not going to be well received in the hearts of thinking, reasonable people. So they will have to do everything they can to take our eye off of this. They will say, well, this is that Gosnell is somehow the fault of you pro-lifers, because it would all be like that if you had your way, you know. And that's just hysterically untrue. But that's what they'll do, and we have to hope that the American people, and I think the American people are a lot smarter than the abortion industry thinks they are. But I think that maybe we have a chance. Now, what the other side of that coin, Lila, is that if America doesn't respond now, I would think shadows would be gathering on our horizons.
You're listening to a special edition of Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins, joined by Congressman Trent Franks of Arizona and my co-host today, Lila Rose of Live Action. Let's talk for a moment, Congressman, about H.R. 1797, which is your bill. Why 20 weeks?
Well, I would suggest to you that I'm convinced that these children feel pain far earlier than 20 weeks, Tony. And that's one of those things that creates a real difficulty for me. But I know that unless we can pass something that can somehow meet the dubious attitudes of many people, that we will never be able to help any of them. The reason the 20 weeks was chosen is because even though the children feel pain before that, the fact is at 20 weeks, every credible medical authority in the world knows that these babies feel pain at that age. There's no debate about it. Now, the other side certainly will say, well, this is controversial, it's unproven. They'll say all kinds of these things. I mean, I think that some of these guys would wonder if the children can feel pain when they're, at retirement age.
Sure.
But the reality is we're just going to have to punch through there, and I think we will.
Well, what was fascinating to me in the testimony from these medical experts during the partial birth abortion case a number of years ago was that children at that 20-week period not only feel pain, but feel it more acutely because the pain receptors are more densely populated. And so it is even more of a torturous experience for these unborn children.
That's exactly what the research shows, and it's something that if it doesn't move us somehow, I don't know. But, they're not only the pain receptors there, but as you know, Tony, I mean, these little children are very delicate. They have very little subcutaneous tissue. The skin is as thin as paper in many places, so the nerves are right there close to the stimulus as well, and they're more clustered. So, I mean, this is not new, and I don't want to name all the horrors that have taken place, but I'll just point out, many years ago, something that didn't really come to light was this situation where Dr. Peter Adam in Helsinki, Finland, cut the heads off of 12 babies and kept their heads alive on heart-lung machines to study carbohydrate metabolism. And I think at that time, maybe if the world had known that, maybe it would have changed our attitudes then. And since then, there's just been this litany, Abu Hayat, Scott Rickey, Gordon Goy, Malvin Weisberg, the guy in Texas. I mean, there's just so many of these monsters out there that we somehow have to help America understand that this is not an isolated situation, and that somehow sanitizing it, putting it in a place where that it doesn't look like some sort of a torture chamber, doesn't change the fact that these are still the same age babies that are dying, and they're still feeling the same agony. When you cut a child's spine, in both the Adams case and the Gosnell case, that's cutting the entire nerve cord that's going to the brain. And if that's exposed, the indications are the baby can't feel more pain than that. You've pretty much created a maximum pain capability.
And just because they can't tell us about it doesn't mean
they
it's not there.
we can't, they cry and scream as they die, but some of them in the amniotic fluid, it's amniotic fluid going over the vocal cords instead of air, so we can't hear them.
Call me naive, Congressman, but what baffles me is the fact that anyone who hears these reports, any average American, is shocked by them.
Of course they are.
If you hear a report about this done to a farm animal, there's outcry from environmentalists or animal protection, advocacy groups. How do you think that? What are the, what kind of ground could there possibly be for someone to stand and say, no, a child, it's okay to do these horrific acts to children? At 20 weeks or any age. There
is no ground to stand on there, and unfortunately, those that do will have the assistance of some in the media that will try to try to kind of pass it over as a reasonable thing to try to articulate a different reality. But when you mentioned about animals, if these were animals at this age, they would be protected by the Humane Slaughter Act in our federal code. So it is something that really beggars description sometimes, but I think and I hope and I believe that America is ready their hearts are changing. We see that across the board. In fact, I don't want to jump out of line here, but something I thought was very significant. The majority of Americans are pro-life, but those people who are pro-life believe that a majority of Americans are pro-abortion. And so, public opinion becomes what everyone else thinks. And we have to understand that the pro-life perspective is a growing majority in America. We are the ones that rushed into Eastern Europe and arrested the Nazi Holocaust. We are the ones that said no more to slavery after thousands of years. And by the grace of God, we're going to be the ones that say that we're going to protect our unborn children.
Congressman Franks, before we run out of time, I want to get to some action steps here, but I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, and that is, if not now, when? And if we don't do it now, what does that say for America's future? And I think once the curtain has been pulled back on the late-term abortion industry, in fact that infanticide is taking place in our midst, that changes the dynamics here. Yes. How can we turn a blind eye to that and still say that we're Americans that believe what our Declaration says, that we are created in the image of God and endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights?
Well, I believe you asked probably the most relevant question that can be asked. Now that we know this, what will we do? Will we uphold that great perspective that the Founding Fathers believed, that every child had the Imago Dei stamped on their souls, the image of God, and they were children of God and therefore worth protecting, of inestimable value? Or will we turn a blind eye to it? If we do, I would suggest to you that we undermine everything that America was ever dreamed of to be, and that we step into that Sumerian night where the light of compassion has gone out, and the survival of the fittest finally prevails over humanity. And that cannot happen on our watch, and I don't believe it will. But yes, if we turn our backs on this, I'm afraid that we've broken the back of what America really is.
Well, and there's an accountability.
Yes.
That comes with knowledge.
Yes, sir.
And in speaking to the pro-life community that's been out there for years, that recognizes that these babies are created in the image of God, we now have a responsibility to do what Lila and others have brought forth as evidence.
Yeah. Lila has made it all happen. You know, there are a lot of things that the abortion industry is very good at euphemisms. They call these little babies, they're little babies, but they call them intrauterine contents, they call them products of conception, and they call abortion things like the evacuation of intrauterine contents or retroactive contraceptive. That's the one I like. And they try to do everything else to use euphemisms to hide from the truth, because they know that once the people see and are introduced to this little baby, that some hearts and minds will change. And there's probably very few people in America that have affected that reality more than Lila Rose.
When we force the discussion,
Yep.
we can win it, and we can win and change people's hearts and minds, because they see the reality of what abortion actually is, what it does to a child, how it hurts a woman.
Yeah. And you know, there's three things that happen, and I'm done here, Tony. I don't want to overstate anything, but there are three things that happen every time an abortion takes place. First of all, a nameless little baby dies a very lonely and often painful death. Secondly, no matter what the left says, a mother is never the same. We leave her with the emotional consequences that are really beyond the understanding of most of us. And then, all the gifts that child might have brought to humanity are lost forever. And we've got to correct that, because our best days can still be ahead.
And this is that opportunity.
Yes, sir.
Congressman Trent Franks, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you,
and
sir.
thanks
Thank
for your
you
leadership.
all you do.
Thank you.
And Lila, thank you so much for the work that you've done and for being my co-host today here on Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks so much.
And folks, let me again thank you for being with us today for this special edition of Washington Watch. And yes, there are action steps that only you can take. I want to encourage you to go to the website TonyPerkins.com. There you can find out all the information about the action steps that need to be taken to make a difference on this issue. You can watch the videos that Live Action has, and you can also send letters to local officials. It's also important that you speak to your locally elected officials, councilmen, because believe it or not, Planned Parenthood gets a lot of money at the local level as well. So go to TonyPerkins.com and follow the links over to Lila's site and take those action steps. Also, ask your member of Congress to support Congressman Trent Franks' bill, H.R. 1797. That is the Pain Culpable Unborn Child Protection Act. That is going to be heard in committee this Thursday, and then it'll be moving on to the House floor. Your congressman needs to hear from you, as has been stated today and cannot be overstated. This is our time to act, and I hope you will do so. And I leave you with the words of the Apostle Paul. When we have done everything that we can do, when we've prayed and we've prepared and we've labored, even if it's been for years, there's no plan B. Just keep standing. Stand for that truth and let the truth be seen and let it be heard. Until next time, for all of us here at the Family Research Council, God bless you.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is a production of Family Research Council in Washington, D.C. For more information on anything you heard today, or if you'd like to find out how you can support the ongoing efforts of the Family Research Council, visit TonyPerkins.com.